Richard is the co-author of How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk and will be signing 100 copies of the book at the Cabana Sessions today. Please welcome Richard to the S4 main stage.
You know, as a security leader, I really have two questions that are, I think all security leaders probably have this question in one form or another. First question is, do I have the right capabilities? Simple question, do I have the right capabilities? Second question, are my capabilities improving as the business scales, as the business produces more risk, as the business exposes more risk, right? So again, the first question, do I have the right capabilities, is a strategic question. The second question, are my capabilities improving as the business scales, is tactical. You could say the first is of the area of decision analysis, if you think that way, and the second would be more maybe data science, okay? My book in this talk is about the first subject. It's about the strategic side of things, so I just want to make sure that's clear, okay? So, with that, what do these four things have in common? The probability of a mine flooding, forecasting the value of drought resistance in the Horn of Africa, forecasting fuel requirements for the Iraq ground war, and predicting the likelihood of breach. Okay? So, they're all catastrophic risks. Most people would think they're impossible to measure, much less predict, and most people would be wrong. So the question I suppose for you is, are you like most people? If so, I've got some good news for you. They've all been measured before, and you do not need to be a rocket scientist to do this. I think that's some great news. So my aim for you today is to convince leaders like you to adopt methods for measuring risk that work. These methods work whether you're in OT, IT, AppSec, or what have you. So you can apply it in any way you like. By the way, all the like spreadsheets and materials that I go over here are available on our website, howtomeasureanything.com/cybersecurity. So all the tools, except for the R code, which I'll show you at the end, that's not up there, but don't worry, it's all replicated in Excel. Just want to say that because I'm going to flip through stuff really fast. So, you know, this is really important. Even if you don't have data, empirical data, you can actually measure risk. In fact, oftentimes from a strategic perspective, we do not have empirical data. We have data in the form of beliefs. And we're going to talk about how we encode that and use that to hopefully make better decisions. So, over the next 25 minutes, I will cover the two real following topics, okay? The problem in doing strategic risk management, quantitative risk management. The problem is our concept, object, and methods of measurement typically aren't correct or aren't suited for this, okay? And the solution is actually more bookies, more robots, and more gambling. All right, so I can take my glasses off now. I needed my cheat notes. So the problem, the concept, object, and method of measurement. I love this quote from Lao Tzu. To know one's ignorance is the best part of knowledge. Okay, so the concept of measurement. Let's look at what two famous measurement experts have to say about the concept of measurement. This is really key. If there's anything that you need to take away from this is their perspective on measurement, particularly if you're engineers, most of you are, right? As far as the propositions of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. That's Albert Einstein, okay? Burton Russell, Bertie, okay? Although this may seem a paradox, all exact science is based on the idea of approximation. If a man tells you he knows a thing exactly, then you can be safe in inferring that you are speaking to an inexact man. Mathematics is referred to as the logic of certainty, and probability is referred to as the logic of uncertainty, right? We're going to be talking a lot about the logic of uncertainty. But most sciences, any sort of measurement process, if you're a scientist, you actively retain your uncertainty, and you do a lot of scoring on your uncertainty. That's really what statistics does, right? So retain that concept of measurement. Now, let's talk about the object of measurement. Concept, retain your uncertainty, encode your uncertainty. Now the object. Love this quote too. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. Charles Kettering. So, Ron Howard, not the actor and movie producer, but Professor Ron Howard, considered to be the father of decision science, decision analysis out of Stanford, has a test for your objects of measurement. It's called the clairvoyant test or the clarity test. So imagine that you're sitting across from this person pictured right here. They are a real clairvoyant, which means they're the only one. Okay, so anyway, so you have a real clairvoyant here. This clairvoyant has perfect visibility into the future, actually past and present, but perfect visibility. There's a problem with this clairvoyant, though. This clairvoyant is brain damaged. I suppose you could say he is or she is an idiot savant clairvoyant. If you were to ask a question as you sit across from this clairvoyant, and you were to use intangible language, they're not going to be able to answer you. This clairvoyant can make no inferences, no judgments. This clairvoyant only responds to future empirical data that's in the form of quantities. So let me provide some clarification for this. So what would happen if you were to speak to a clairvoyant as such? Again, object of measurement, you say to this clairvoyant, hey, what about reputation? Are we going to have some reputation damage? This is a question I hear often. I hear this from board members and otherwise. What about reputation damage? By the way, one big important fact about reputation, do you know that there's no such thing as private reputation damage? That sounds kind of interesting, right? All reputation by very nature is public. So, okay, good. So what if you were to reframe it and say, hey, after a breach where there was regulated data exposed publicly, right, of however many millions of records or more, you get very specific, would we see less sales of this amount during this time frame, right? Or would we see an impact in our stock, right, during this time frame where the variation in the stock is differentiated from any sort of normal fluctuations? Well, we actually did this. We looked at this in our book. And we looked at a couple of breaches. The book was published in 2016, by the way. And actually, while it does look like Target had an impact that would seem relevant to the breach they had, actually it was not. All the fluctuation was actually associated with normal fluctuations they're experiencing. There was no correlation whatsoever with the breaches that these companies had. And we see this kind of across the board. What we do see, again, what the savant would see if you were to ask them, is we see penance projects. What are penance projects? Penance projects are legal fees and typically IT fees that happen post-breach for some time, right? So in the case of Yahoo, for example, we now found out this last year, it was actually, the size of the breach was 3 billion records, right? A lot of PII. There was a discount in their sale to Verizon of, I think, $250 or $350 million, can't recall what it was, but they actually recorded, at least to date, $16 million in penance projects. And we see this repeatedly. We see penance projects. We see deterministic fees spent on legal and IT. So we're aware of that. So when it comes to reputation damage, while reputation is an intangible, we do actually see impact, not typically in stock or customers, but actually in penance projects. This is going to be important, and the Yahoo thing will become important. We'll come back to it. So concept of measurement, retain your uncertainty. Object of measurement, get very specific, empirically, quantitatively, about what you would see in the future. Super specific. Uncertainty, specificity. Now the methods of measurement. I love this quote. It's not what you don't know that will hurt you, it's what you know that ain't so. So methods of measurement, a little philosophy here, and then I'm going to give a real example. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You don't need to measure everything. This is really important. Most of you probably know this joke, right? You've got two campers, or hikers, they're going out for a hike. One of them stops, puts running shoes on. The other hiker says, hey, why are you putting running shoes on? And he says, well, you know, there's bears out here. The other guy says, well, you're not going to outrun a bear. He says, no, I'm going to outrun you. When it comes to the methods of measurement, statistical processes, probability, what have you, we're not looking for perfection. We don't need all the data. We're looking just to compete, to beat the competing model. That's all we want to do. We want to get better at beating the competing model. The competing model, of course, might be yourself, or it might be some competitor. Maybe it's the bad guy. But the idea is not perfection, but beating the competing model. Okay, it's not the size of your data that matters, it's how you use it. Small data works, even beliefs as data works. You know, statistics is really about using small data. You're probably, since you're engineers, you're probably familiar with the student t-test. Don't know if you know its origin. It was actually out of a Guinness brewery. It was actually intellectual property. They wouldn't let the guy who wrote it, who created this particular probabilistic statistical approach, put his name to it, so he actually published it anonymously as student T, as actually a student. Anyways, they used it for looking at crop yields to get a better idea about producing their wonderful beer, and it was actually considered a competitive advantage. Super, super small data sets. Like, we're talking like well under, obviously, under 30 samples. Small data's in. We love small data. You can measure highly uncertain rare events like breach. About to show you how to do that. And Measuring intangibles is in. We just talked about intangible. Reputation's an intangible, but if we decompose it and are clear about our objects, we can then start using statistical methods or probabilistic methods more effectively. So let's look at that. Let's look at a great example. Let's see what a jar of marbles can tell us about measuring breach. Imagine a jar of marbles that has anywhere from 5 to perhaps billions of marbles in it. They're red and blue ones. You don't know how many. You're highly uncertain. Okay? Your job is to start making bets on this as you get incrementally more data. Let's say the red represents breach and the blue represents no breach. And boom, you draw 5. Look what you get. You get 1 red. If you were asked to bet and the stakes were high, life or death or what have you, and you're a betting person, you would not want to, the math tells you don't bet 99% red. The math says it's likely somewhere between 1 and 45%. We don't know the truth, I'm not sure, but if you're forced to make a bet, and you're a card counter, you want to bet somewhere in here. So we put those back, and we draw 15 more. Get a little more information. Again, it could be a billion marbles. We don't know. It could be 15. If you're a betting person, the math says you should bet somewhere between 0.34 and 18%. It's not the truth. It's not reality. We don't know. But if you're making bets, this is where you want to go. All right, put those back, and we do 75 more. And based on this, if you're a betting person, between 1 and 8%. This just so happens to be the breach rate for Fortune 500 healthcare. I worked in healthcare for 12, 13 years, right? The breach rate for healthcare based on public data that the savant would be aware of, this is something measurable, where you had breaches in healthcare between 2014 and 2016. And if someone were to come to you, your board were to come to you and say, hey, Rich, what's the chance of us being breached? I would say, well, based on the data, it's possible, right? What we do know is that it's roughly the expected average about 5% chance of being breached based on what we have. It's not reality, right? But if I'm being asked to make a bet and there's serious stakes at hand, I would bet like this, particularly if I worked for Fortune 500 healthcare companies, which I have done. So, all right, so we've talked about the concept, object, and methods of measurement. The concept of measurement, right? We retain our uncertainty. We encode our uncertainty. Object of measurement, we're super hyper clear about quantities in the future we'd expect to see. The methods of measurement are probabilistic methods. By the way, he was using the beta distribution for that little example there. Hits and misses. It's great. The theme of limited cognitive capacity conflicts with our preconception about how smart we are. Love that quote. So the solution, bookies, robots, and gambling. Let's talk about bookies and why that's important. You know, when a bookie says it's a bookie that's still alive and actually successful in their career, when they say that something has a 90% chance of occurring, do you know how often they're correct? Actually, 90% of the time. This has been studied a lot. How about 80%? If they say something has an 80% chance of occurring, do you know how often they're correct? Actually, 80% of the time. I don't know if you've read Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, Kahneman's book, Nobel Prize-winning decision analysis. Actually won the Nobel Prize in economics, but he's a decision psychologist, right? Lots of study in this area. So what is it about bookies that makes them so good at what they do? They're really well calibrated. How did they get there? First of all, they get quick feedback on their bets. Typically, they're not waiting a year to find out, who won, NBA or what have you. They're getting typically pretty quick feedback. Secondly, they're betting with money. A lot of study and decision analysis, by the way, on the use of money, both real and fake money, have the same impact. It's just important to use money when you're making bets. It's very helpful. Number 3, the threat of physical harm, either that they will inflict on others or that will be inflicted upon them. Those 3 things work together to make them very well calibrated. You, though, as security professionals, as executives and what have you, are not so good. So I've blessed to have worked with Doug Hubbard. He's done one of the largest empirical studies on this, particularly in security. And what this represents here is a series of duplicate pair judgments. So when we're doing assessments, we're doing collective intelligence on professionals, we typically have a long questionnaire, maybe 100, 200 questions of various risks, and they're looking to fix probabilities. You'll see this in a moment. But we'll put duplicate pairs in there. Like question 1, we'll make duplicate without them knowing it as question 65, right? And what we find is that they are highly inconsistent. In fact, you are roughly 21% inconsistent when you make your decisions. You're highly uncalibrated. Yet, when it comes to choosing your strategy, when it comes to making investments in security, when it comes to a variety of things, this is the calibrated instrument that you're using to make your decisions. Highly uncertain. We can correct for that. Let's talk about that. So how do we do that? We want to get better at correcting for your inconsistency, calibrating you, turning you into bookies, and then encoding the data that comes from you as we go to make decisions, right? And so we want to get where our correlation between our model estimates and us is actually pretty good. So when we ask questions like, what's the probability of breach given cloud, PHI, encrypted, et cetera, it's pretty consistent and encoded and put into our systems. So I'll show you more about that. So bringing it all together, this is a spreadsheet, this is all available online. There's a variety of these things up there, you can play with these yourselves. So, gambling. So we have robot-generated probabilities based on bookie inputs. I'm going to show you how to do that really in detail in R in a second. I know I'm moving fast. We have bookie-generated ranges in terms of impact, 90% confidence intervals, right? And then we have gambling machines, usually Monte Carlo scenarios. I'm going to show you more about that shortly. That's what we're doing. We can do really interesting stuff, by the way. We can start looking at gambling on the value of security investments, too. Given this investment, what do we likely believe will be the reduction in probable future loss, right? Risk is a curve. Use it to bet on highest impact investments that cut across risks. And I want to talk about this thing briefly, risk tolerance. The risk tolerance is a huge topic in the subject of quantitative risk management. And most people come to me and say, Rich, how do you determine risk tolerance? Do I have to go and interview my board or interview whatever? You can do that. We talk about that a bit in the book. But you know, you typically already have a good idea of what your risk tolerance is. You have a mathematically unambiguous expression of risk tolerance actually in the budgets you do or don't receive. In the security budget you do or don't receive is an expression of your organization's risk tolerance. It's mathematically unambiguous. It may be an unconsciously incompetent expression, but mathematically unambiguous it is. Secondarily, if you have cyber insurance is a mathematically unambiguous expression of your risk tolerance. It too likely is, can be, a unconscious incompetent expression. Most brokers, by the way, what they do is they go and they say, oh, you're in this market, all right, I'll go look at 20 other companies that are in your market. I'm not going to bring my actuary. I'm going to look at what they're doing, their premiums, what have you, and I think you look like them, so I'm going to say, okay, you need to pay this much for this much coverage. That is actually how it works, right? It truly is how it works. The challenge, of course, and I saw this in one consulting gig I did where a company received their cyber insurance via this methodology. The problem was that this company, the brokers didn't look at the fact that this company was persisting over 2 trillion records of data, huge amounts of data, and they didn't take that into consideration in their modeling. So anyways, consciously incompetent expression, mathematically unambiguous expression of your risk tolerance. So you can start getting into large portfolios of risk. You can look at maybe each portfolio is a plant, right? Or maybe it's a portfolio of applications or what have you. So risk becomes a curve, it becomes additive, where you can actually add your global portfolio together and look at risk and make forecasts. I know I'm going fast. So modeling experts. So when you're modeling experts, we have 2 things here I want to talk about. In this case, we're going to have a model where we have 9 experts. These are security professionals who have been calibrated. They are now bookies. They're very good, they've been tested, and they are highly consistent. You can't get rid of all errors, but they're relatively consistent. And we're going to have 25 applications in this use case. They can be 25 large SCADA systems, whatever you have, 25 crown jewel critical assets. All right? And we're going to be looking at 5 factors as we look at these applications. 1, is it, here, this is probably a little easier view, is it externally addressable? Basically, is the thing internet exposed or not? Is there regulated data, 1 million records or more? Regulated data meaning if there were a breach, there would be various forms of punishment. And then 3 capability maturity processes. Assurance process, which you can call configuration management if you like, vulnerability management process, and then incident response. So 3 capabilities. Those capabilities have maturity, right? We have 4 levels of maturity in this model. You have nothing, no evidence, no empirical evidence of those capabilities. Ad hoc, some empirical evidence, but not systematic. Scheduled, meaning SLA, actually application of the processes, and then continuous, all right? So we have this methodology of looking at 25 applications, we have 9 bookies, and they're going to be affixing probabilities to these scenarios. In this scenario, this is a small one, I think it was roughly a 200 questionnaire. That's enough to do for our algorithms to actually learn and actually encode beliefs. So we do that. So we do that to get our probabilities. Now we talk about impact, right? So we've got the probabilities, we've got our bookies, they've created probabilities, they're encoded now, they're in our system, in our software, in our memory. And now we're going to talk about modeling financial impact. In this case, this is a model based on records breached. Now, I know it's verboten in the security industry. The people say, hey, you cannot create a model to forecast impact, financial impact, based on records breached. I would say that's an anti-conservative crazy way to approach things. You actually know something about data breach. For example, you know that one record breach is not a billion-dollar impact. You actually know that. You also know something about the weight of African elephants as well. You have some idea. It's not 1 billion tons. It's not 5 ounces. We have some information. So I've actually created a model here. In this case, by the way, it says 10 million to 10 billion records. It's actually 10 million to 5 billion records. This gets input. It actually encodes our uncertainty, by the way, right? Going back to the concept. And it comes up with this. By the way, there's a lot of randomness in this, so there'll be some variation every time it runs. It spits out a little bit different numbers, kind of along this range here. By the way, the Yahoo breach, and this is modeling penance projects, IT impact and legal impacts. This was done prior to what we found out about Yahoo and impacts, which was 16 million impact. So, you know, I don't know if it's good or bad or indifferent, but it's better than nothing. So we have this idea, rough estimate of impacts. Now we're going to bring that all together into gambling machines. I talked about how we do gambling, Monte Carlo scenarios. You're going to now understand what Monte Carlos are, because a lot of people think they're very complex. They're not. Think of a roulette wheel. You have this large roulette wheel, and in this case we have 25 applications. This roulette wheel has 26 slots. One slot is very large. The marble's going to go in there a lot of times. And then you have 25 other very little slots, which represent your bookie's aggregated probabilities, right? And we're going to spin this, all right? We're going to spin it 25 times. 25 times of the spin, we'll call that a trial. We do this once. What does it look like? By the way, this is our output. I'm sorry, it's ugly. We spin it. We have one impact that's about $1 million, and we have one impact that's about $600,000. Okay, we're going to spin it 100,000 times, or we're going to do 100,000 trials, which is 2.5 million spins, right? When you don't have data, you make it up. Statisticians are big cheaters. We cheat too. So here's trial 100,000. We do this one. This trial had no impacts, okay? So why does this matter? So what we're going to do now is we take all this data that we have, concept, object, method of measurements, we brought it together, now we have all this data in memory. Now we're going to do a thing called, it's very fancy, it's called probabilistic programming. We're going to ask some real basic questions of this data, which has encoded our beliefs. It's not beliefs about reality, it's a model, right? You've heard the George Box statement, right? All models are wrong, right? But some are useful. We actually say, and some are measurably more useful than others. So we're going to ask a question. Hey, what's the likelihood of losing $10 million or more in year one? Based on my current capabilities, right? Based on, in terms of my, all my applications, be they internet-facing or not, data or not, taking into consideration their capability maturity along the lines of assurance, vulnerability management, and instant response in IR&M, right? So my model, which is a very dumb model, it's wrong, but useful, says it thinks there's a 20% chance. And you're probably thinking, gosh, that's really very, very specific. If you go back, if you recall in the spreadsheet, risk is a curve. We have this big bulbous globule of information in here, and we just asked a very specific slice question of it. But the reality of the uncertainty is all under the curve, and it goes out this way into black swan territory. So we asked another question, well, what about having an impact one time in year one, based on my current capabilities, of 50 million or more? We asked this, and the dumb model says, I think that that's roughly a 1% chance. It seems like unlikely. Okay, great. I have some more questions. What about over the next 3 years, as I forecast my I'm going to make some investments. I don't know if I'll get the money or not, but I'm going to bring my capabilities up to a certain level over 3 years. I model that out. Over 3 years, what's the likelihood of having a $50 million impact one or more times over 3 years as I make these investments and capabilities, right? I'm going to go out there and do this. The model says, well, I believe it's about a 2.4% chance of you having a breach, that where it's one time or more, $50 million or more. So why is this kind of thing useful? And what have I done with this? I actually use this sort of thing to understand if I actually have adequate cyber insurance. I've actually done that. I've used it. Very simple, right? Easy, easy, easy to do. If I hadn't done this, by the way, and I've had this experience in my previous situations, I would have probably not made any changes. I've actually used this to make changes, wise changes. So let's talk a bit more. So how about this? Here's another question. Again, probabilistic programming, we're actually able to ask our encoded data, our machine, questions from different angles. What about the minimum dollar loss at 10% likelihood? The model thinks, oh, well, you're going to lose $16 or $17 million or more. It thinks 10% likely. Okay, well, how about 10% likely in year 3? Year 3, assuming that I've made some maturity, right? I've actually matured my processes, gone from, let's say, ad hoc to more scheduled. I have SLA-based processes that are actually working. I think so. Well, you'll likely 10 million. So there's an improvement, a $7 million improvement, let's say, right? Okay. What should I expect, though, on average? So that's a big thing, right? This big curve. On year 1, asking this curve, this is confusing. What should I expect just to lose on average? Dumb model thinks $6.5 million. Okay, how about year 2? I do some improvements. What does year 2 look like? Model thinks $5.2, $5.3 million. Okay, that's great. What's my return on investment, though, between year 1 and year 2, taking into consideration the spend that I'm going to have? I spend $1 million between year 1 and year 2 to invest in security. And what is the ROI that I get? No, it's 23, 24%. Okay, well, that's interesting. Is that good? I don't know if that's good. It's all relative. That's actually another question. How about if sales comes to me and says, hey, well, by the way, if you use that money to get us, PCI compliant or whatever compliant thing, we believe we can enter these new markets. And in fact, we forecast that our sales will be between 10 million and $100 million. And because all salespeople are liars, we'll go with the 10 million. We'll actually put the $10 million into our model and say, okay, well, what's the return on investment based on this forecasted opportunity gain, right? I don't know why we're so uncomfortable making forecasts. Sales do it all the time. They're not good at it either. Wow, 1,023%. Is that good? That's a horrible question. We don't know if it's good. The reason we do this is we're trying to encode things in a mathematically unambiguous way. This is a form of scoring. That's really what probability is, right? Probability counts up all the different ways things could happen, all the possibilities in theory, right? And then it helps you determine what are the most plausible things. It's just weighted. So what we're saying is, well, I don't know if that's good. If I'm highly uncertain, let's say I have 10 things I want to invest in over the next 3 years, right? I'm doing strategic work, and I'm unsure what's most important. Right? Let's say you have a heat map, right? And we beat up on heat maps big time in the book. But you'll say you have a heat map, and up here is the red area, like the maroon, red hot area, and you have like 10 things, and you're really huge risks, and you're not sure what to invest in. Well, this is the type of thing that would help you to answer those questions. You don't, by the way, you don't necessarily say, oh, well, therefore this is 1,000%, this is 500% return, therefore I'm going to do 1,000. No, this is just this is a prosthetic. It's a cognitive prosthetic. It's bionics for your brain to help you make better decisions, but you are actually the one still making the decisions. So this is strategic, called quantitative risk management, applied to security. You could apply it to what you do. There's the other side of the coin. I mentioned again, there's 2 things I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with, do I have the right capabilities? Am I investing in the right things? Secondarily, are my capabilities improving, particularly as the business scales? I said the first is strategic, latter is more tactical. The latter one is more what you call maybe data science. Right? But here's a good joke. You can ask your data scientist this, or you can just tell them this actually. What science isn't data science, right? All science is about confronting your hypothesis with data. Whatever data you have, even if you have limited data or no data. You have data in the form of expertise, by the way. You've spent a lot of money on your experts. You, in many cases, have spent more money on your experts than you have on security gear. They know a lot, right? They have a lot of information. You should be encoding that and using that. On this tactical thing, by the way, in terms of how we deal with are my capabilities improving, particularly as the business scales, that subject is the subject of another book, which I'm proud to say this week Wiley has agreed to publish. It should be out later this year, if not early 2019, and it'll be empirical models that you can actually run real time. It looks at epidemiology, it looks at hurricane analysis, it looks at even anthropology, it looks at natural sciences in general, and it looks a lot at sports fan models as well. It looks at all these models to actually look at security, look at empirical data coming from your systems to make better decisions about that second question. So, a lot of information I just gave you. Everything's in the book. I've been told the book is really good for pressing flowers. I've also been told that the paper of it is very thin and can be used in a dystopian future in case you run out of paper. So anyways, read the book if you can. There's 100 of them. I'll be signing those at 1 o'clock in the Cabana and look forward to seeing you all again, hopefully when my next book is published, assuming that I get it done. Thank you very much.